His thigh brushed mine in the dark, and I didn't move. Not because I was frozen, not because I was afraid, but because, deep down, I didn't want to. I didn't know his name, not yet, but in that moment, in the silent flicker of the opening credits, I already knew he was going to change everything. I liked watching movies alone, always had. There was something comforting about slipping into a dark theater, letting the world fall away while you disappeared into a story that didn't need you to speak, to explain, or to pretend. The quiet, the cold of the air conditioning, the way the screen swallowed everything, it had always been my kind of escape. Hey, if you're here and feeling the vibe already, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe to support these stories and help more people find them. It means the world, and it keeps us going. Thanks for being here. That night, I hadn't even planned on going out. It was a Thursday, just after 7, and I'd been halfway through microwaving leftover pasta when the craving hit. Not for food or company, but for that strange, anonymous calm that only came from the hush of a half-empty movie theater. So I tossed on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and walked the few blocks to the old neighborhood cinema. I bought a single ticket to some indie drama I'd never heard of, the kind with a title that sounded like a poem and a poster that didn't give much away. The girl behind the counter gave me a bored smile and didn't even ask if I wanted popcorn. That was fine. I didn't. Inside, the theater was nearly empty, just how I liked it. 3 people in the front, an older couple a few rows down, and me. I slipped into the back corner, far right, the way I always did. The trailers had already started, flickering across the screen in soft, grainy bursts. I sank into the seat, pulled my hoodie tighter, and let myself sink into the dark. And then, he walked in. I didn't hear him at first, just noticed the movement out of the corner of my eye. Tall, lean figure stepping into the aisle. He paused for a second, scanning the rows, then slowly made his way toward the back, toward me. At first, I assumed he'd sit a few seats over. Most people did, but he didn't. He sat 2 seats away, close enough to hear him breathe, close enough that I could feel the air shift as he settled in. I told myself not to look, but I did anyway. He was maybe in his early 30s, clean-cut, slightly tousled hair, dark jeans, and a green hoodie. The glow from the screen lit the edge of his jawline, sharp and smooth, and the rise of his cheekbones. I didn't stare, at least not for long, but I noticed things. His hands, large, strong, resting on his thighs. The way his fingers tapped gently along his knee, in rhythm with the music playing over the credits. I tried to focus on the film. I really did. But I could feel him, not just sitting there, but being there, present in a way that made my skin hum. I stole a glance again, just a quick one, and that's when it happened. He looked back, not a passing glance, not a casual acknowledgement. His eyes, dark, maybe hazel, held mine in the dim glow of the screen. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just curiosity, openness, like he was asking a question without saying a word. I looked away first, but not before my stomach flipped. Then, about 20 minutes into the film, he shifted, slowly, subtly, and the seat between us, empty, untouched since he arrived, was suddenly no longer there. He moved into it. Now we were side by side. I felt the brush of his sleeve against mine as he leaned back, pretending to watch the movie. My heart was hammering, my hands twitching in my lap. I didn't know why I didn't move. I should've, I could've. But instead, I just sat there, letting the tension stretch between us like a held breath. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But his elbow rested just close enough to graze mine. His thigh pressed lightly into my leg. And when the quietest moment of the film settled over us, when the theater was completely silent, I heard him exhale, low and steady, like he was trying to calm the same nerves that were knotting up my own chest. The heat between us wasn't imaginary. It wasn't a mistake. It was building, growing, taking shape in the spaces where our skin met, in the beat of our breaths, in the quiet understanding that somehow this night, this movie, this dark, this moment was no longer ordinary. And then I felt it. His hand, not touching, not quite, but hovering. He rested it just between us, palm down, fingers relaxed, but the pinky edged against my thigh. A single point of contact, light as air. He didn't look at me, didn't move again, but the message was clear. This wasn't an accident, and neither was what came next. For the next 10 minutes, we didn't move. Not much, anyway. But it wasn't stillness. It was deliberate. Tension curled itself around us like smoke. Thick, slow, creeping into every inch of space that still separated our bodies. His pinky, still lightly touching my thigh, never twitched, and I let it stay. I didn't know why. Maybe because I was tired of pretending I didn't notice. Tired of being the quiet observer in my own story. I sat there, wide-eyed and half-breathing, as the flicker of the screen played over our faces and turned something quiet into something charged. He shifted again, slow, like he was checking for any flinch. His arm moved, resting along the back of the seat. My seat, but not quite touching me. The warmth radiating off his body was maddening. My skin prickled where his breath tickled the edge of my ear. "You here alone?" His voice barely above a whisper. Not intrusive, not arrogant, just curious. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He didn't say anything else, just leaned back again, satisfied, as if the answer had told him everything he needed to know. I finally dared to glance over, meeting his eyes again. They held mine, calm, unreadable, like he was still deciding something. "Me too," he said. That's when I noticed it. His other hand, resting between his legs, fingers flexing slowly, like he was trying to focus on the movie and not on whatever was building in that tight corner of space we were sharing. I swallowed hard. The screen in front of us played on. Something dramatic. A breakup, maybe. A quiet sob from the woman in the front row. But I couldn't follow the story. Not anymore, because mine had already started. He leaned closer again. Not much. Just enough to bring his lips near the shell of my ear. His voice, low and certain, rolled over my skin like a touch. "You okay with this?" I could have said no, could have stood up, walked out, left the theater and never looked back. But instead, I turned to him. And for the first time, I said something back. Yes. His smile was small, almost invisible, but I felt it more than saw it. He looked down, briefly, then back up at me. "Good." Then his hand moved, confident now, resting fully on my thigh. His thumb brushed against the fabric of my jeans, slow circles, testing. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my knees press closer together out of instinct. He stilled. "Want me to stop?" The question, again, gentle but charged. I shook my head. "Don't." He exhaled softly, the kind of breath you let out when you've been waiting too long for something that finally gives in. And then, right there, with a half-empty theater around us and the soft glow of the movie flashing across our faces, he slid off his seat, slowly, deliberately, and got on his knees. My heart slammed against my ribs. He didn't look at me right away, just stared forward, pretending like this was normal, like kneeling in front of a stranger in a nearly empty theater was something he did every weekend. His hand stayed on my thigh. His breath was warm against my lap, steady, focused, like he was waiting for a sign to go further, but not forcing it. I felt dizzy. My palms were sweating, my skin hot. And yet, I didn't want it to stop. Not any of it. He looked up at me, finally, and when our eyes locked, I felt the air shift again, something invisible snapping tight between us. "This okay?" he asked again. This time, I didn't nod. I reached out slowly and brushed my fingers through his hair, and he leaned in, not rushing, not aggressive, just a slow, quiet slide into the space between want and permission. I tilted my head back against the seat, pulse roaring in my ears as his hand gripped my waist with steady, grounding pressure. The screen flickered. A kiss played out in the film. A soft musical swell filled the room. And in that moment, I didn't care that we were strangers. I didn't care that I didn't know his name, because something real was happening, and not just physical. It was connection. It was risk. It was the first moment in a very long time that I'd felt something wake up in me that I hadn't even realized was sleeping. The credits started rolling, but neither of us moved. Around us, people stood, gathered their bags, stretched their arms, and whispered their thoughts on the ending. But for me, the real ending hadn't come yet. It was still unfolding, right here, in the dark, with him slowly rising from between the seats, like he hadn't just changed something inside me. He sat down beside me again, hands resting on his knees, not touching me anymore. But the heat between us still crackled, like we hadn't stepped back at all. His breathing was steady, but when I looked at his face, really looked, there was something like fear in his eyes. Not panic, not regret, just vulnerability. He turned to me, opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but stopped. Then finally, with a small, unsteady smile, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. My voice was caught somewhere behind my ribs. But after a breath that felt like it stretched a mile, I nodded. Outside, the air hit like a splash of cold water. The streetlights buzzed above, and the night smelled like popcorn, car exhaust, and summer rain. I followed him without a word as we crossed the nearly empty parking lot and leaned against the brick wall behind the theater, where shadows fell in soft folds. "I don't usually do that," he said, eyes still scanning mine for judgment. "Me either." We stood in silence for a few moments. He looked up at the flickering marquee like it might offer a script for what to say next. But there were no words waiting, just the space between two strangers who weren't quite strangers anymore. He stuck out his hand, finally, like we were meeting for the first time. "I'm Marcus." I took it. His grip was warm, sure. "I'm Ian." He repeated my name under his breath, like he needed to test how it felt in his mouth. "Ian," he said again. "Okay, that helps." "What does?" "That you're real. That this wasn't just..." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't even know what that was, but it wasn't just physical. "No," I said, a little too quickly. "It wasn't." Marcus turned to face me fully. His posture wasn't cocky. There was no swagger now, just openness, the kind of look someone gives when they're trying not to mess something up before it's even started. "You want to go somewhere and just talk?" he asked. "Not home, not far, just somewhere." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I did. A few minutes later, we were in his car, the windows slightly fogged, music low, headlights off. He parked at the edge of an overlook just outside town, a quiet spot above the trees where you could see the city blinking in the valley below. "I come here sometimes," he said, hands still resting on the steering wheel, "when I don't want to go home yet." "Why?" I asked. He gave me a look that somehow managed to be both tired and amused. "Because home's complicated." I nodded. "Same." We sat there for a long time, not saying much, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, safe. We shared stories in pieces. How he'd just gotten out of something messy, how I'd never really been in anything at all. We talked about loneliness, about fear, about wanting things and not knowing how to ask for them. And eventually, he reached for my hand. Not in some grand, dramatic way. Just a quiet slide of his fingers across the console, brushing mine until I laced them together. It was more intimate than anything that had happened in the theater. He turned his head slowly. Our shoulders touched. He looked at me like he could already see the next chapter unfolding, and maybe he didn't know what it would hold, but for the first time, he didn't want to stop reading. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said, eyes still locked on his. "Now I am." And as the stars blinked silently overhead and the hum of the city faded behind the glass, I realized something simple and terrifying. I didn't want this night to end. The next morning felt like a dream I hadn't fully woken up from. My phone buzzed with notifications, group chats I wasn't interested in, reminders for things I no longer cared about. But all I could think about was the last time I saw Marcus, his hand in mine, his forehead resting lightly against the window as if he was trying to freeze that moment in time. He texted me, just one word, "Coffee?" I stared at it for longer than I should have, then replied, "Yes." We met at a cafe that smelled like old books and burnt espresso. It wasn't crowded, just a few people buried in laptops or quietly reading, and the low hum of indie music filling the space between us. Marcus was already there, sitting at a small table near the window, spinning his coffee cup slowly with one hand, like he wasn't sure how long he'd be waiting. He looked up when I walked in. His smile wasn't big, but it was real. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, slipping into the seat across from him. We talked, again. Less about big feelings this time and more about little things. Favorite movies. Dumb things we did as kids. The kind of stuff that doesn't seem important until you realize it's how you learn someone piece by piece. He told me he liked the quiet, that most people were too loud, too fast. That's why he went to the movies alone. He liked watching how stories unfolded without anyone trying to talk over them. I told him I did the same. That I liked sitting in the back row because it made me feel like I was alone in the world, but in a good way. Marcus looked at me for a long time after that, eyes warm and steady. "Funny how we both went there to be alone," he said, "and still ended up finding someone." That stuck with me. After coffee, we walked for a while. The afternoon was cloudy, a soft wind nudging at our jackets, and the city felt distant even though it was only a few blocks away. He didn't try to hold my hand this time, didn't push, but I could feel it in the way he walked close enough that our shoulders brushed with every step, that we were both thinking the same thing, but too scared to say it out loud. At a quiet intersection, we stopped. No traffic, just the hum of a distant bus engine and the rustle of leaves. "I don't know what this is," I said finally, "but I don't want it to stop." Marcus turned toward me, that quiet confidence returning. "Me neither." He stepped closer, his hand brushing my cheek with the lightest touch, and right there, in the stillness of an empty street, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or wild, it was soft, careful, like a promise forming in real time. And I believed it. Because somehow, in a world that always felt too loud and too much, I'd found someone who made the quiet feel full. It had only been a week since that kiss on the sidewalk, but it felt like something permanent had shifted in the air between us. Not in an obvious way. Marcus didn't suddenly flood my phone with messages or ask to see me every night, but in subtler things. In how I caught myself checking my phone more than usual. In how the empty back row of a theater didn't feel like my place anymore unless he was there too. We didn't talk about what we were or where this was going, but when he asked if I wanted to go see something Thursday night, I said yes without hesitation. The film didn't matter. It could have been anything. I just wanted to be near him. We bought tickets separately, the way we always did, and somehow still ended up walking into the theater at the same time. He nodded toward the same back row, that slight curve of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Guess it's our spot now," he said. It felt like a strange kind of sacred, the space we always met in. The rows ahead of us filled slowly, but ours stayed empty except for us. The lights dimmed, the previews started, But the real story was happening between our shoulders, in the accidental or not press of his arm against mine. Halfway through the movie, he leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about that kiss." I swallowed. The screen flickered in front of us, colors washing over his face. "Me too." His hand moved, slow, deliberate, fingers brushing against mine on the armrest. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned my palm up, let him lace his fingers through mine. It felt strangely intimate, like more than a kiss, like letting someone see the softest part of you and hoping they'd treat it gently. He shifted, leaning slightly toward me. "I keep trying to convince myself this doesn't mean anything," he murmured. "But it does, and it's kind of driving me crazy." I looked over at him. His face lit in brief flashes from the screen, expression honest in a way that left me breathless. "I don't want to pretend it doesn't," I said, "even if it's complicated." Marcus exhaled, slow and shaky, like he'd been holding that truth in for too long. We stayed like that for the rest of the film, fingers entwined, arms brushing, the space between us quietly collapsing. And even though we didn't speak another word until the credits rolled, it felt like more was said in the silence than any conversation could hold. Outside, the night was warm and still. We stood in the parking lot for a long time, the world around us buzzing soft with the quiet hum of streetlights and faraway cars. "I don't usually do this," Marcus said, eyes fixed on the ground like it might give him courage. "Let someone in this fast." "You think this is fast?" I asked, my voice light, teasing. He looked up, the corner of his mouth tugging upward. "For me? Yeah." I reached out, touched his wrist, barely, but he leaned into it. "You want to come over?" he asked, voice lower now, a little uncertain. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because something about this moment felt delicate, like it was asking me to be careful with it. But still I nodded. "Yeah, I do." He smiled, small and real, and just like that, the story we hadn't planned to write kept unfolding, line by line, touch by touch, in the quiet places between what we said and what we meant. Marcus's apartment was smaller than I imagined, but in the kind of way that felt warm, lived in, soft lighting, records stacked on a shelf, a mug still on the table from the morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for some reason, that calmed me. He didn't say much as we walked inside, just locked the door behind us and toed off his shoes like he was suddenly shy again. I stood in the middle of his living room, unsure what to do with my hands, my nerves, my thoughts. He crossed past me and motioned toward the couch. "Sit, I'll grab us something to drink." I sat, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed the distance for a second, needed to breathe. He came back with 2 glasses of water and set them down like we were about to talk about something important. And maybe we were. But instead, he just sat next to me. Close, not quite touching. "This okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes tonight," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I should ask." "You could have," I said, glancing sideways. "I think I've been waiting for you to." He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I was already starting to recognize. I didn't know how not to ruin this, whatever this is. I turned fully toward him. "You haven't ruined anything." We were quiet for a moment. Then he shifted closer, knees touching mine. His fingers brushed along my wrist, slow and hesitant. I let my palm open. "I don't want this to be just a moment," he said, barely above a whisper. "I don't do moments well. I forget them, or I pretend I didn't care about them." I looked at him, really looked. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I saw it then. The fear behind the confidence, the heart behind the grin. "I don't want to be forgettable," I said, voice steady. His hand moved to my jaw, thumb grazing the edge of my cheek like he was trying to memorize it. "You're not." The The kiss came slower this time. No theater to hide in, no shadows to blur the meaning. Just lips meeting with intention, his hand steady at the base of my neck, his chest pressing gently against mine. We didn't rush. His fingers traced the outline of my shirt, and I could feel the warmth building between us like a low burning flame. Not frantic, not careless, just steady, real. He pulled back once, eyes locked to mine. Still okay? Yeah, I breathed. More than okay. And when we moved toward his bedroom, hands never breaking apart, our kisses trailing like breadcrumbs behind us, it didn't feel like a secret or a mistake. It felt like something we were finally ready to let happen. The way he touched me was patient. Like each movement asked a question and waited for the answer in my breath. He didn't rush through my hesitations. He waited for me to catch up. He learned the shape of my ribs with his palms, the curve of my spine with the brush of his fingers. There were moments of laughter, quiet gasps, and the kind of closeness that makes you forget how much space used to be between your bodies. And when we finally lay still, his arm resting across my chest, his breath slowing, I realized I didn't feel guilty. I felt full. In the silence, he whispered, "You're not like the others." And in the darkness, I whispered back, "Neither are you." I woke to the sound of rain. Not heavy, just the soft, rhythmic patter against the window. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. The air smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. There was warmth behind me, Marcus's chest, his arm still wrapped loosely around my waist, the steady rise and fall of his breath syncing with mine. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. It felt rare, sacred. His fingers twitched against my skin like they were still dreaming. I didn't move. I didn't want to wake him. Not yet. Because for once, I wasn't rushing to escape. I wasn't replaying last night with shame or doubt. I was still inside it. Every kiss, every touch, every pause where we just looked at each other like we were both trying to figure out what had just changed. Eventually, his voice broke through the quiet, groggy, and real. "You still here?" I turned my head slightly, caught the edge of a sleepy smile. "Yeah." He tightened his arm around me. "Good." We lay like that for a while. The world stayed soft, unrushed. And when we finally got up, stretching, half-dressed, hair a mess, there was no awkwardness. Just coffee being made in silence, eggs cracking in the pan, and Marcus humming some tune I didn't recognize but already loved. He slid a mug toward me across the counter, met my eyes, and smiled like this wasn't a one-time thing. "I'm not great at this," he admitted, stirring his own cup. "I've been in things before, but nothing like this." "Like what?" I asked. He paused. "Like it actually matters." There it was again. That honesty. The kind that could ruin a person if they weren't ready for it. "I don't know what happens next," I said, gripping the mug tighter than I meant to. "But I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." He stepped around the counter and stood close enough to feel that gravity between us again. "Then we don't pretend." I nodded, and he leaned in, not rushed, not dramatic, just one soft kiss on the side of my neck, near my collarbone, like he was saying, "You're safe here." We spent the rest of the morning on the couch, legs tangled, movie playing in the background. At some point, his hand found mine, and neither of us pulled away. No one was watching, no shadows, no back row, just sunlight on his skin and the quiet certainty that something had started, something real. The next Friday night, I went back to the same movie theater, not because I was chasing a coincidence, but because I was hoping for something real this time. I didn't know if he'd show. Part of me was sure I'd sit alone again in that same dim row, watching the screen flicker with scenes that couldn't touch what we'd already lived. But 5 minutes before the trailers rolled, he appeared. He didn't say anything at first, just walked down the aisle, hands in his jacket pockets, and stopped in front of my seat. His expression held the same quiet tension I remembered, but there was no hesitation in his eyes this time. He lowered himself into the seat next to mine, letting the shared silence speak more than words ever could. This time, he reached for my hand right as the lights dimmed. His fingers found mine easily, like they'd been there before, like they'd never left. The film began, but we didn't look up. We sat there in the dark, hands intertwined, hearts quieter now, settled. It wasn't a rush, it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, and it felt like peace. Midway through the movie, his head leaned onto my shoulder. The weight of it was soft, warm, familiar. I turned slightly, kissed his hair once, and he let out the smallest sigh, like he'd been holding something in for too long and could finally breathe again. Neither of us needed to speak about what happened that first night in the shadows of the back row. It lived between us still, but not as a secret anymore. Now, it was a beginning, one written in shared glances, cautious touches, and quiet understanding. As the credits rolled and the house lights returned, we didn't move. We stayed, fingers laced, hearts steady, two men who had wandered into something unexpected and decided to stay. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. And finally, there was no more space between us.